I love this Steam Deck, playing games in my lap, but I kind of feel like I'd rather be playing on a nice big screen, like a really nice gaming monitor. Oh, I just had an idea. There we go. Now I have chips and root beer. That was a freaking awesome idea. I'm out of chips. I play lots of handhelds of various shapes and sizes. It's kinda one of my things, if you haven't noticed. And one thing that always gets me excited is when a device can be plugged into a TV or monitor to use it in a sort of docked mode. Yeah, as if it's a home console. When I hear that a device has video out via USB-C, or if it has an HDMI hole, that really gets my juices flowing, if you know what I mean. Yeah, you do. But one thing that I've learned when using external screens is that every display gives you a different experience. There are lots of factors that go into picking a good monitor for PC gaming, and there are lots of factors that make a monitor good to use with handhelds. And I'm going to explain and show you these factors on this. It's the PX277 PRO, and spoiler alert, I love this thing so much, and it has all the gaming specs you could ever want, but most importantly, this thing has all the special features that set it apart from most displays that make it perfect for not only using as a gaming monitor for your console or PC or whatever, but also as a display for your handhelds, be them handheld gaming PCs like the Steam Deck or your retro handhelds. And we're going to talk about those features today. The company that makes this monitor, PIXIO, they reached out and asked if I'd like to review any of their products. I heard of them before because I've seen other YouTubers reviewing their stuff. And when I looked through their stuff, I was impressed. Basically every type of monitor, shape and size and price point that you could want from this company. They were like, well, since you do lots of Steam Deck and handheld content, then we'd suggest this one because it has a bunch of features that would be good for your audience. And they were right. For I/O, we have, well, quite a bit for a monitor, as you can see. We have a USB-B hole, which allows this to act as a hub for the rest of these holes. We have two USB-A holes for plugging in your keyboard or your controller or whatever, and an Ethernet hole. Interesting. And over here we have a power plug hole, another USB-A hole, which is just for power, I think. There's one HDMI 2.0 hole rated for 144 Hz, one DisplayPort 1.2 hole rated for 165 Hz, and a USB-C hole, which offers power delivery at 65 watts and DisplayPort video at 165 Hz, and a headphone hole. It's very easy to put in and out of the stand, and the stand has a hydraulic lift or whatever, so you can raise it up or down easily. Nice stand, very firm without being overly big. There's also some RGB, so you know it's for gamers. The screen itself is 27 inches. Here it is next to my cat. It's bigger than my cat, so that should give you a good idea of the size. We have some pretty thin bezels around the edge, which is nice. No buttons on the front, but we do have one of them nipples on the back that can sort of act like a D-pad for navigating the menu. More on that later. So before we do anything else, I'm going to do a thing. The PIXIO PX277 PRO is VESA mount compatible, and so is my monitor arm. So it's just a matter of screwing it in with the screws. And then I had to redo all my cable management with cable ties and stuff. And here she is in her new home. Hey girl, how you doing? Looking mighty fine. And real quick, let's go over the specs. It's 27 inches, QHD 1440p resolution, fast IPS flat panel, 165 Hz refresh rate with 1 millisecond gray-to-gray response time, 1000:1 contrast ratio with a max brightness of 450 nits, but we also get HDR support, which makes that 450 nits feel more like more than that. For the color gamut, we get 131% sRGB color space coverage, 96.6 DCI-P3 color space, 92.8 NTSC color space, and 97.1 ARGB color space. And we get adaptive sync in the form of FreeSync Premium. I will mention that G-Sync isn't officially supported, but it does work if you enable it manually. Everything that you can do on this monitor, you can do in the on-screen display using that little nipple nub at the back. They call it the jog button, but I'm gonna continue calling it the nipple. It's like a little joystick. You get some quick functions so you can flick it left and right or up or down to get easy access to switching inputs, outputs, color mode, and gaming features. Or you can press the button to bring up the settings. You get a display area where you can change the picture settings, a color section where you can change the color stuff, obviously, a gaming setup section where you can do important gaming stuff like toggle FreeSync and change the overdrive mode, turn on the FPS counter, turn on a crosshair, enable high dynamic range or HDR, some other stuff. Here you can change the input, some basic system settings, and they have a user profile switcher. So if you share your monitor with your mom, like I do, and you like different settings, you don't always have to be switching everything around. I love the way they've done the settings. It's easy to navigate and the quick access is super useful. Good stuff. The monitor passes with flying colors in all the tests that I threw at it. I can't show you in the video because filming screens never properly conveys what they look like to your eyes. But as far as I'm concerned, this is outstanding. The objects in motion are crisp and clear without ghosting. Scrolling text is perfectly readable. The variable refresh rate test passed with flying colors. Gray to gray response time is the best that I've ever seen. I don't have one of those color accuracy measuring devices. I should probably get one if I'm going to be doing monitor reviews, but I don't have one yet. So I'll just say that subjectively, this is a beautiful display. It has that 131 sRGB coverage, so I was expecting the colors to look great, and they do. But the contrast and brightness is really where it's at. This is a 450 nits display, which is a lot for an LCD panel, but with the addition of HDR, it feels more like 800 nits or so. The blacks aren't black, like they are on an OLED, but they're pretty darn dark. However, the super bright lights make them feel black. I know the video you're looking at isn't gonna do it justice. You gotta trust me. To your eyes, it's gorgeous. There are a ton of features to this thing. Let's start with an easy one, aspect ratio. This one is for the retro handheld gamers amongst you. Most retro systems are 4:3 aspect ratio because they were made to be played on TVs that were 4:3. Most retro handhelds have a 4:3 screen. However, things get weird when you plug a retro handheld into a TV or monitor because most modern displays are 16:9. So what happens then? Well, more often than not, it'll just stretch the image to fill the screen. And more often than not, there's nothing you could do about it. This is where having a monitor that gives you aspect ratio control on the monitor itself is important. Because if I plug my RG35XXH into this thing, for instance, you can see that my image is stretched all the heck, but here we get an easy toggle. This is hugely important for retro game devices because so many of them are really good except that they don't output at a 4:3 ratio, even though the games are all 4:3. I would never buy a monitor or a TV without this feature if I intended to use it for retro games. Next up, another easy one, the resolution. So this monitor here is a 27-inch 1440p display, which means that it has a pixel density of 108 ppi. A PPI of around 100 is sort of the baseline. At this size, any less than that and you'll be able to see the individual pixels of your display. I think a 1440p resolution on a 27-inch monitor is great because that's a good balance of pixels at this size. So the image looks crisp as heck and it's not nearly as demanding as 4K to render games at 1440p. At this size and resolution, we get pixel perfect integer scaling on the vast majority of retro systems. And even the ones that we don't, there are so many pixels here that you literally can't tell when the games aren't integer scaled. So all of your retro systems will have clear, uniform pixels with crisp edges. And on to the refresh rate. We got 165 Hz max with this thing. Not bad. That's a perfect refresh rate experience for the most part. I know lots of the sweaty pro gamers out there like 240 Hz or above, but I don't play Fortnite, so this is plenty for me. The overdrive setting on this monitor is the best that I've ever used. Overdrive is basically a method that the monitor can use to reduce motion blur that you get on moving objects, which is important on very high refresh rate monitors. I found that the balanced overdrive profile gave me the most consistent performance across the board. That, combined with the 1 millisecond response time, I cannot not notice any ghosting, even in the most extreme synthetic situations. In motion, the games are so silky buttery smooth. And on the topic of the refresh rate, the adaptive sync that we get on here is FreeSync Premium. I'm using this on my testing rig, which it has an NVIDIA RTX 3060 GPU, and this monitor isn't G-Sync certified, but it works perfectly fine if you enable G-Sync manually. If you haven't seen a 165Hz screen in motion with adaptive sync and decent response time and overdrive performance, man, you're in for a treat when you do. I like my ultra-wide monitor on my main rig a lot, but since I got this thing, I can't stand gaming on any other screen. It's so dang good. And in terms of retro gaming, that high refresh rate gives us another benefit. We can make use of black frame insertion, or BFI. This is the new hotness in the retro game world. Even though it's been around forever, suddenly everybody's talking about it. Long story short, it's a motion blur fixing thing. It inserts a frame of pure blackness between the frames of your games. In retro games, this means that if the game runs at 60 FPS, then you'll need at least a 120Hz monitor to use BFI, so that it can put a frame of black between each of those 60 frames. That black frame will sort of clear the previous image away, so there's no ghosting. This is more important on monitors with ghosting issues though. I can't show you what this looks like because filming my screen you can't film this. You need to see it. And honestly, I think it's a little overblown. It really doesn't make much of a difference. But if I could describe it, it just sort of feels like the pixels in motion are crisper, if that makes sense. Yes, it does. However, it does make your image a bit dimmer. Not really worth messing with in my opinion, but it is an option on here because we do have the refresh rate to support it. And finally, my favorite special feature of this monitor. It's called KVM, which means keyboard video mouse. It works like this. Like I showed you, there are a bunch of holes on the back of this thing. Those are for plugging in all your stuff, like your keyboard and mouse and controller. Now, why would you want to have those plugged into your monitor when you could just have them plugged into your computer or your Steam Deck dock? Well, think about it. You're only ever using your monitor for one thing at a time, right? So when your computer is displaying on your monitor, obviously you want to be using your keyboard and mouse and controller with your computer at that time. And when you have your Steam Deck on your monitor screen, you probably want all that stuff to be usable on your deck. KVM switching solves this because you can switch the input source between devices the exact same way that you switch the video source. For example, this is my computer. I have my keyboard, my mouse, my controller, all plugged into the monitor, and they're all streaming the inputs to the computer. Now, I'm going to plug in my Steam Deck via the USB-C port, and then switch the video source over to USB-C, and then the KVM source over to USB-C, and within a few seconds, I have my Steam Deck on my display, and my keyboard and mouse and controller all immediately work on the deck. It's so freaking convenient to be able to do this with a push of a button. Even if you don't intend to be switching devices, having it all plugged into your monitor and then connected to your device with just one cable makes sense because it's cleaner and it frees up the other ports on your device. Now that I have a display with KVM, I want every monitor that I own to have it. I love it that much. On the topic of the Steam Deck, real quick, there's one other super cool thing that we get here. This thing has 65-watt pass-through fast charging. So with that USB-C cable that we use to plug in the Steam Deck for video, that also charges it. And since it also supplies the Steam Deck with the controller, keyboard, and mouse inputs, with this one single USB-C cable, my Steam Deck is instantly docked with everything that I have connected to my monitor as well. And because the monitor has FreeSync, the Steam Deck can use VRR when it's connected. And HDR. This monitor has HDR, so you can do that too. And you can run your games at whatever resolution you want on the external display. You're not stuck at 800p like you are on the deck. You can go up to like 1080p or 1440p if you have games that can actually perform well at those resolutions. I know lots of monitors do this stuff, but this is my first time owning one, and now I'm learning why it's so great. I love it. So what do I think about the PIXIO PX277 PRO? I love it. I was not expecting this level of quality at the price that these things go for. And most importantly, this thing has everything I need for retro games. Everything from the aspect ratio options, variable refresh rate, the perfect resolution for integer scaling. This is the stuff that you want if you're a tech dweeb like me. I'll include some links in the description below. And that brings us to the end. Thanks for watching and stuff. If you like this video, then check out this video, my review of the most ridiculous monitor that I've ever used. A tiny little retro CRT thing. That's a fun video. There's a link on the screen right now and down in the description below, and you can go watch it now because we're done. I'm TechDweeb, thanks for watching, bye-bye.